long as I can remember, since my wife and I have been married and living out here, we didn't host. We went to my brother-in-law's house this year.
Yeah,
Because my wife basically put her foot down and said,
somebody else's turn.
I'm done hosting Thanksgiving. I'll still do Christmas, but I'm done hosting Thanksgiving.
You know what, I have 5 brothers and sisters, it's always the girls.
Yep.
And now 2 of my sisters sneakily moved to Florida.
I mean, I'm not trying to make you sit in this spirit seat, but
So now it's you.
as well.
Pretty much me.
So you have all the leftovers.
Oh,
You gotta learn to send that stuff home with people.
I tried. I don't know what the deal is. Well, you don't need 2 turkeys when they're 20 people.
No.
Especially since mine was a 20-pounder.
I just want to get away something. I just don't post things. I'd like to know how you do it.
Well, when my wife says to my sister-in-law, I need a break this year, and I need you to host, and if you don't want to host, then I guess we can just do our own thing.
There you
Claire,
go.
do you know if Mr. Brazel's going to be here?
I saw him earlier.
Okay.
So I bet she took a lot of stuff along though, didn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
See, it's hard
normally-
to carry a turkey around in the back of your car. They don't like it.
Jennifer basically did a whole meal, my sister-in-law would bring over 1 or 2 things. And Jennifer's like, yes, I want to visit 1 or 2 things. I don't want to go at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Well, I started 3 days ahead.
Oh.
Brine the dang turkey and move the table.
Come here.
Well, if you want leftovers, come on.
Sounds like you
Spur.
got plenty.
I got
Best
plenty.
friend's got a big family, you got 45.
No, that's not right.
Wow.
Do they eat
why don't
outside?
you-
How do you put 45 people in
I
your
got a big
house?
house.
You have to. He puts them all through the house.
Your seat this year is in the public throne in the bathroom.
Exactly.
We're out of space.
That's the kids' room. Are we rolling?
Well, I was just giving Mr. Brazel a moment, but is he in the building?
He's in the building.
He's been cited.
He'll catch up.
See if he's in here.
If there's pizza, he might be in
He's getting dressed.
there. Getting robed.
He's enjoying pizza.
I'll give him 1 minute.
Started at Fans 590 today.
Oh, good.
So
Good for you.
we'll start there.
My son.
Did you stay in town?
I got the job at Fans 590.
Oh,
So I
yeah.
started there today.
Wait, that's not the living room.
No,
You could go see different one.
So we all went to
maybe later.
Ah,
They've got a communications manager position that's going to open up.
Uh-huh.
It's just not open yet.
gotcha.
So
Every year they ask
Well, congrats on the new job.
You're a sports guy, that's the station.
that's the station.
Oh, the station. Oh,
yeah, this is
gotcha.
It's also
way
really
classier than the Hollanders really deserve.
It will be fun.
All right. All right. Well, I'd like to open up the work session of December 2nd, 2019, concerning the recommended St. Charles County budget for 2020. This evening, we have Michelle McBride with us, and I'd like to open up the meeting and give Michelle the floor.
Thank you, Councilman White. The collector's budget starts on page 31 is the general revenue budget, and the tax maintenance fund budget starts on 196. Couple concerns. If you look at the collector's tax maintenance fund budget, you will notice on that page 196 that the cost allocation in 2017 was $3,300. In 2018, it went up to $22,288. In 2019, $52,503. And in 2020, it's being set at $79,681. Now, I understand what this is all about. This is the same issue Barb Hall had in 2018. And a conversation, Bob and I are talking about different things, but he did state today that the general fund revenues from the non-general fund departments, we're trying to create general fund revenue from non-general fund departments. And that's what this tax maintenance fund was created by statute, not to substitute for or subsidize any allocation of county general revenue fund. I'm not here to cause a stink. I'm going to play nice in the sandbox so you can relax about that. The issue is, we've been talking this for years, that we are in this downhill slide and it's not sustainable. So we really do need to look at what's happening and what we can do. I brought along a couple little bits of information, and I would have printed it out for you, but different things happened this afternoon that didn't allow that. But back in 2014, when we still had 16.0016 property tax rate, if we had simply kept that small pittance, you would have your $800 and some odd thousand to give a raise for. It's my understanding there's some provision in the statute that requires us to roll back the entire ceiling rate of .1434 at this point in time. Bob and I were talking because, you know, if that's something statutory, it's something we may need your help talking with the legislators about. Because if we could charge 14 cents, we'd be huge. If we could charge half of that, we would have money to give raises. If we could charge a quarter of that, I'm not sure, I'd have to do the math, but we have to find a way to get back some of our property tax without having to go to the ballot. Because everybody knows you get to a ballot and you say tax increase and everybody's going to say no. That being said, I want to make you aware of the Stop 2020 initiative petition if you haven't already heard of it. Stop 2020 is about eliminating personal property tax. If personal property tax were to be eliminated, there's a potential for Road and Bridge Fund to lose over $2.6 million. There's a potential for Dispatch and Alarm to lose around $590,000. So if we're already on an unsustainable path of not having revenue and generating revenue on paper, switching from non-general revenue income to move to general revenue, this would be a direct hit to general revenue that we need to be concerned about. Because I don't think Road and Bridge can do without $2.6 million. I don't think Dispatch and Alarm can do without $600,000. And those are real concerns. So the cost allocation going from $3,300 to $79,000, almost $80,000, all we're really doing is window dressing to make it look better for the general fund. It's not really changing revenue to the county. And that's my concern, that we need to find a way that is appropriate to regain. My department, on page 12 of your budget, we are fortunate in that we can contribute to the positive revenue of the county. About middle of the page, you'll see that for 2018, we brought in $7.8 million. We cost the county only one of those. So the other $6.8 million was to help fund other things. So it kind of hurts a little when I see an expense going from $3,300 to almost $80,000. Granted, we are one of the offices that has that pleasure of,
Where are you?
Page 11.
Page 11?
oh, well, it says page 12 on the one from the interview, so I apologize.
Yeah, it's all front page.
Okay, so page 11,
Gotcha.
middle of the page, county collector revenues and expenditures. My department is aware of it, and the maintenance fee on our current software is outrageous. I've asked for assistance in trying to negotiate that down. We found out in the last month that the vendor for that software has, I'm not sure if they exactly sold it, but our software has basically been acquired by another vendor who is a company we did not choose to go with. So I believe it's probably realistic to think that in the next couple of years, we're going to be RFPing and we're going to have to get some new software, and we're going to have to make sure it all aligns with the assessor. And the goal behind that would be to reduce expenses. But that money's going to have to come from somewhere. So if we're chunking $80,000 out of tax maintenance, I may have to turn around and ask general revenue, which general revenue isn't going to have it, because that's just what we're seeing. We know the sales tax is tanking. We know the e-commerce is hurting us. I am aware that NACO, the National Association of Counties, has been working for the past couple of years to try and get the local governments their share of the internet sales tax. I'm not sure how much is done at the Missouri level yet. Hopefully, our legislators in Jefferson City are working on that, because that is definitely hurting local government. And if we can't replace the revenue that we've lost, we're not going to be able to provide the services that we want, and you're not able to give raises like you would like to do, and that's just, I came tonight more so to just make sure your eyes are wide open and that we are looking for everything we can do. I don't have a problem playing nice in the sandbox. I don't have a problem saying, you know, we'll take this and transfer it this year. There may come a point when I have to buy software and I will have to say, you know, I can't agree to it this year. But in the past, we
Michelle,
never had to do that.
Specifically speaking, on your particular issue, I came in late. So the 3,300, explain that 3,300 from last year to 80,000 this year, is that what
No,
you?
it was 3,300 in 2000. It's been a couple of years. It's been growing. If you look at the tax maintenance fund,
What page are you on when you're picking that up?
I'm on 196, so I'm thinking it's 195 on yours. It's fourth from the bottom under operating expenses.
So you,
Where is it, John?
Cost allocation
Cost
line is what she's looking at.
so it's estimated to be 52.5 this year, basically, right?
Oh, for 2020, it's 79,681.
Yeah, but for
19.
last year, it's a 2019 estimate, it looks like you paid 52.5.
52,503 was imposed, yes.
Okay. And when what, I guess that's just for, supposed to be for the total support of your department?
Well, supposedly, but that's what the statute strictly says it's not to be used for. So I've agreed to it like the other elected officials, most of the other elected officials, because we realize how important it is to run this county. But at some point, our office may need those funds for what they were dedicated to. And then we're not gonna have them because we're constantly having expenses imposed upon our dedicated funds.
Well, okay, Joanne or Matt or whoever, what is cost allocation and why is it increasing so significantly? I know we talked about this last year, but I
We
can't
did.
remember this stuff.
This is the fourth year we've had the cost allocation plan. This was started in 2017. And prior to 2017, we had a very subjective and a highly antiquated methodology for assessing overhead charges to departments that were outside the general fund. And that was, we charged a flat 1% of revenue to any department that was not in the general fund. So you take a department like transportation that takes in $25 million in revenue during the course of the year, calculate 1% of that, and they had one employee at the time. Okay? It was just something we always did. And we realized that we needed to do something different because it was too subjective, it was way outdated, and we needed to do something. Every year for many years, and it's been going on as long as I've been here, and I suspect very much longer, the county has had a cost allocation plan prepared where certain grants that we have with the state and federal government require the calculation of an overhead, an indirect overhead rate, where they take the cost allocation plan and those percentages of that are ultimately calculated by the cost allocation plan are the percentages that the grants will reimburse us for the indirect costs of an operation to cover administrative costs of a department and the overhead of a department, not necessarily just the direct expenses of the grant program. So we've had this cost allocation plan prepared for a long time. It provided us for a means to begin to say, you know, instead of charging non-general revenue departments just a flat 1%, this methodology is a lot more responsible and a lot more credible than just say we're going to charge you 1%. So we embarked in 2017 with the first version of the cost allocation plan that was used for purposes of calculating what non-general revenue funds would reimburse the general fund for. Since 2017, each year, we've gone deeper into the cost allocation plan. In 2017, we started it mid or even in the latter part of the budget discussions. And after that first year was done, we realized we could do some things to make it more reliable and more accurate as to how overhead charges are calculated. We did so again in 2018, or in 2019, and we actually did that again in 2020. We have been looking at this in much more depth, and we've spent hundreds of hours on the phone with our consultant, working through what makes sense when you get into departments that furnish, IS as an example, that furnish a centralized service to non-general revenue departments. So each year, we've had different versions of the cost allocation plan where we've addressed other things, and we believe, and our consultant believes, that we've made the cost allocation plan much more accurate. That's why you're seeing this progression in these numbers.
Where's the revenue on all the cost allocation for all the different offices? Where does that be? Where's that received at? Where's it come in at? Where's it
Cost
shown?
allocation plan revenue shows up as a revenue line item in the revenue summary page at the beginning of the budget in the general
Okay.
fund. So all the cost allocation numbers roll up into one number that you'll see in the revenue summary.
What page, revenue summary, or just on the front?
Hang on a
That's
second.
all right, that's all right. You don't have-
Question, is her increase is about 50% of her cost allocation for her department? Is that atypical of the rest of the departments? 'Cause I'm
It
looking
depends
at
on the department, and it depends on what was going on in that department, and what was going on in the departments furnishing the service.
How do you come up with that number and the percent increase? I mean, how do you doing that?
It's a
It's a-
167-page report.
Yeah, it's a-
And there are flowovers where here's IS's expenses, but let's add to IS's expenses the cost of the county counselor and the cost of the auditor and the cost of the finance department. It's a very complicated
Well, Bob, how
method
can,
of
It's page
realigning
6.
numbers.
So could I give you an example maybe of why it changes? So for instance,
That was not quiet. Gentlemen, no.
the cost allocation plan shows, because we're always a year behind because you have to have a full year worth of services. But in 2018, the IT department, the IS department heavily supported the emergency communications department in the planning and building of the new EOC. So their costs are very high for that year in terms of cost allocation. Those will go back down again now that the thing's built. But in that year, a number of staff were allocated to that department because they were assisting in preparing that dispatch room. So those people will be allocated in other places in 19 where they weren't working on that project. So a lot of this is dependent upon the human resources of the county and where they're being used. Some of it's dependent upon things that are pretty much the same from year to year, like maybe utility costs or the cost of the phone systems or that type of thing. So it's a mixture of all of the support costs of the county and how they're allocated out to the departments that use them.
Which is directly subsidizing or supplanting the general revenue fund, which is not what the dedicated funds were intended to do. If this is a general revenue expense, it should be in the general revenue budget. It shouldn't be against dedicated funds that have been created to give the resources for computers, for software, to provide the additional things the citizens want, that the general revenue doesn't have the money to provide. And without this cost allocation, if all of these dedicated funds dried up, the expenses that are getting put through as cost allocation would still have to be covered by the county.
is all the offices, is it all offices get cost allocation or just the elected official offices?
No, all the offices,
All
all the funds.
offices, all offices, all departments, and all funds outside the general fund all have a piece of this calculation.
Okay, so if Michelle has a disagreement on how this is legally being transferred, or whatever she's claiming,
Well, wait a
who should she
minute,
take that
wait a
up
minute,
with?
hold on.
Well, and there is some disagreement about supplanting, and we've had that discussion before. Some of the elected officials see it as supplanting. It does not meet the legal definition
Not
of
illegal, but
supplanting.
whatever she's saying, not, you're saying, what are you saying? It's-
I'm saying that if this dedicated fund, the collector tax maintenance fund, is based on late payment penalties. So the better job we do at collecting taxes current to make all the political subdivisions, including the county road and bridge fund and the county funds, the lower the income will be to this fund. So to continue to assess expenses to it, if the fund materially shrunk, the opportunity to transfer funds to general revenue from a non-general revenue dedicated fund is gone. So we are setting ourselves up as a county to potentially, well, we're already saying we don't have the money for things. We're already being told, you can't order a box of file folders, or you can't do this, or you can't do that. So
Nobody's saying that, Michelle.
that's not what I was told. So
Yeah, you guys think?
last year, the question was raised, are the elected officials held accountable for their budgets? There's no quote-unquote penalty for not abiding or staying within your budget, but anybody who sets a budget wants to be within their budget. So when other things are imposed upon your budget that weren't historically or that have materially increased over time, it's upsetting. My budget already, and I hate to say it, is the expenses are over the income. So we will eat away at the reserve that's intended to help pay for a computer system. Our last computer system was $2 million. So a $400,000 reserve isn't going to cover that whole thing, which means we'll have to limp along with what we have. And meanwhile, we're paying close to $250,000 in maintenance a year. It's unsustainable.
For what it's worth, we just run some quick numbers. Your cost allocation went up 52%. If you look.
That's because I have a direct expense
Let me
of an
finish.
IS employee.
Let me finish, okay? Yours department went up 52%. Countywide, if you look at the change from 19 to 20, okay, went up 33%, okay? But let me finish one more thing. Before you complain about yours, take a look what the assessors and recorders did, because their cost allocations went up a whole lot more than yours did. And we haven't heard from them yet, but hopefully.
Well, the recorder wasn't happy with it, and I doubt, the new one is not going to say anything because she's new. And the assessor knows that this is the only way to help the county budget balance, and as I said in the beginning, you can leave it in there. I'm just giving you the caveat because I think it's important you have it and you know it. Because for the 12 years I've been coming to these meetings, we've been saying the same types of things, but we have not reversed the trend. We went ahead, although in 2008, we sat here with a 30-cent property tax rate, we went ahead and eliminated it in 2015.
We had to. That's
what you were told.
yes.
Now, I've seen pro formas. I don't know all the ins and outs of that because that's not my job, so I haven't taken the time to look at it. But from what I have seen, we fill out a pro forma. We fill out our estimated revenues. We fill out our estimated sales tax. We impute the rate that we need to cover our expenses.
There's a way you can figure out a way for us to reinstitute some of that property tax without going to the voters. We'd sure like to hear it. Okay? Okay?
Well, I'm researching it. I printed out the whole section 137-063, which the rate letters are built on. Because we get the rate letters, the certified rate letters from the state auditor where it says 0.1434 and that we have to reduce it 0.1434. I'm not sure if the state auditor puts in the sales tax reduction number, if we put in the sales tax reduction number. Bob was trying to start explaining it to me this afternoon. That's why I said Bob and I have been talking. We would both like to find a way to increase the revenue for this county.
I've had discussions when we were approaching the point where our general fund property tax was going to hit zero back in 2013, 12, something like that. it was abundantly clear that we were getting to the point where the mandatory sales tax rollback, and what that is when we started with our property tax in the late 70s, we had a 35-cent tax levy. Because we passed a general fund sales tax, we were required to take 50% of any new sales tax and reduce our tax levy for that 50% increase cumulatively. Take that 50%, reduce our property tax revenues that we were allowed to levy by that 50%, and then calculate a new reduced property tax levy.
Question while you're there. Was that by state statute that we had to do that, or was that put in the sales tax increase ballot language?
That was in,
By
help me with
the
that one.
rollback, it's state statute.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so.
I'll send the council that statute.
Was it, well, that's what I'm saying. Did we tell the
Yes.
voters we were gonna do that, or we were mandated by state law?
did that,
But that's that was Prop C, Bob, right?
Yes, that's
Where the
correct, it was
school
Prop C.
Schools got a sales tax increase in return, all property had to be reduced by half of whatever additional money.
Right, so the theory was that you weren't going to purely double dip, where you had a property tax and you have a sales tax. There was a clawback provision based on the increase in your sales tax, that as your sales tax increases, 50% of that reduces the allowable revenues you can generate from your property tax, and you recalculate the property tax at a lower rate. So that started sliding as soon as that provision went into the law.
If we want to undo that, I'm sorry to interrupt, but if we want to undo that provision, is it a matter of going to the voters for a vote, or is it a matter of changing the state
I
statute?
don't know the answer to that
You would
question.
have to change the state enabling legislation that has the rollback provision in it.
There's
which
enabling
affects-
legislation that let us pass the sales tax initially. Okay.
So over the course of time, and as I saw the gap between our ceiling rate and zero getting closer, I actually had a rather lengthy exchange with the state auditor's office to make sure and to debug any issues that we had in our historic calculation of the sales tax rollback. I inherited that from the former director of finance. As we were getting closer, and I wanted to make sure that when we hit zero, it was true zero and not any kind of an anomaly. The state auditor reviewed those calculations, and that's where we are right now. The calculations were reviewed by the state auditor's office, endorsed what we had been doing and what we do to this day. The sales tax rollback now has led to us having about a 10-cent negative tax rate. So we still have to deal with the issue of, if there's a property tax out there that would go before the voters, do we have to recover that 10% of what we're asking the voters for before we get any new revenue? I don't know the answer to that question. That's going to be something Counselor's office would have to
One would
really-
think there'd be a provision there. If sales taxes dropped off the face, you would think that would enable us to bring the property tax back.
It would have to come back more than I would, and when Michelle and I were talking today, I referred to it, it would have to be a cataclysmic event that would allow our sales tax revenues to drop that far to where you're going to recover a 10-cent, just to get back to zero, a 10-cent deficit in our tax rate. That's somewhere in the area of $8 million that our sales tax revenues would have to decrease. So you wouldn't want to see that happen. So, at this point, that's the provision that we have, and the ceiling rate that Michelle is referring to on the pro forma from the state auditor's office, that is before the sales tax rollback. So the sales tax rollback takes that number to zero because the sales tax rollback is higher than 14 cents.
I'm with you. I think if the sales tax have been dropping and it's based on an increase, somehow there should be a way to recover our property tax. I just haven't had
I
time
know
to
you're a
delve into the
member of some
statutes.
auditors or collectors association, and I know you keep up with NACO, and I try to read their newsletters as well. in general, it's not healthy for a county to have 59% of its income coming from sales tax. I think that's really abnormal if you look at other counties. So I would ask when you check around, try to find out what the average is, because I think most counties have it pretty well balanced. If nothing else, they have more property tax coming in than sales. We're the exact opposite of that. It's flipped.
Well, I think you're right about that. We're one of 3 counties in the state of Missouri that don't have a property tax for the general fund. I put that grid together for the county executive a while back.
But that doesn't mean our citizens don't have property taxes. I mean, the school districts and the municipalities and the ambulance district and the library district and all those certainly are on their radar every time their tax bill comes up.
With the buy-in, the reassessment year, okay, I just got my property tax bills in, wow. I haven't complained to you yet, but you might be coming. No, but I mean, that's going to increase your revenue for your department substantially, because most of my bills went up 10, 15%. Will it not? Don't you get a percentage of the amount collected?
My department doesn't, it goes to general revenue.
Okay,
That's what that 6-point-some million that I contribute to general revenue is for.
right. So
Yeah.
we should get more in general revenue from your department this coming year.
Yeah, that fee is based on pure dollars collected, so,
Yeah,
yes.
so if anybody had to roll their rates back, then theirs will go down, but yes. In theory, we were charged with $675 million to collect. If all of that were collected in December, we'd get 1% to 1.5% for the cities. Yeah. So I can live with the budget. I just think we better quit just talking and start really delving in and seeing if there's something in statute that we need to look at, trying to get, if sales tax, if you got to reduce 50% for an increase, then maybe you get to increase for a decrease. And it should be cumulative, because there's something in the statute about the 1980 rate. And, I just started reading through this when the different things went down, and there's a lot more I need to do to read on it. But right now, tax bills are my priority. But that's my concern, is that we're every year saying the same thing, and I just want to make sure we don't just say it and we really do something. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. How's the council want to proceed with the budget?
Yeah,
We've got,
go ahead.
Dave and I have been working on something regarding county raises, and I'll let Dave start out and go from there.
Basically, I'd like to see us do a 2% raise for the employees. And I know Joe did some research on some things having to do with the family arena, and I think it comes down to, for a 2% raise, a little over $800,000, and that would be only for employees who make $80,000 or less. Would include the higher salaries. How we came up with that number, and so that's what I'd like to see happen. And I know I keep getting pushed back that say, well, you find the money. Well, I don't think it's my responsibility to find the money. I think it's county finance director and administration to find the money for the pay raises. So even if we had to reduce our reserve from 10% to 9.5%, I think we should do it. Go ahead, Jim.
I went to Brent Statler to get some numbers, and Dave went to Bob's. I like Dave's idea of cutting it at $80,000, simply because some of the higher paid employees just simply don't need it as bad as some of the young police officers and young people with families that are in this county. So, where we talked before about 2% total increase would be $2 million. By cutting out the folks over 80,000, you drop that to a vicinity of $800,000. That Statler came up with 751, some added to it. Bob's numbers were a little over 8. So you figure 800,000 is a pretty close number. There's I think 101 employees over 80,000 or above. There's 950 below 80,000. So by doing it, your rank and file, better 90% of your employees would get a 2% raise. Bob challenged us to come up with the money, and I asked Brett Statler, if you're probably aware, I pick on the finances of the family arena quite a bit, and one of the things I asked Bob at the last meeting was if any general fund money had ever gone to the family arena that could be paid back. And Brett pretty much confirmed that, other than the fact that prior to 2012, the family arena reimbursed the county for police services, for the police officers that serve at the events of the family arena. From 2012 on, for some reason, we have not reimbursed them. Okay, the general fund has not been reimbursed by the family arena. I asked Brett to calculate that, and it came in for a little bit north of $1 million. I've got a spreadsheet that shows that. I also checked the budget, and I don't know what total available resources means, because there's not, some of the accountants like to use different words than business guys do sometimes, but it looked to me like there's $3.6 million of total available resources available in the family arena. So simply, if we have the family arena pay back for those police services that the county provided from 2012 to date, you'd have $1 million going back into general fund, which would easily support the raise we're talking about. Additionally, there's roughly $2.5 million a year going from the capital improvements fund to the family arena, and I think with what we have planned with jail improvements, if we did, and this is some granite and axe again, but if we turned the family arena over to the Parks Department and had Parks pay for improvements to family arena out of that $12 million surplus that they have in the Parks Fund, that would free up $2.5 million a year approximately from capital fund that we could use for jail improvements. And while $2.5 million doesn't sound a lot of money, if you take that and bond that along with the $1 million we're supposed to save by a more efficient jail, you come up with a pretty big number that you could use to finance a lot of jail improvements. So that being said, I'm with Dave. I think the county employees do an excellent job. No employee wants to be in a job where you're not getting increases, especially a new employee. They're going to start jumping ship. We're going to become a training ground for other employees if we don't do something. I know we're eating the cost of insurance increases to them, and that's a big thing, but it doesn't do anything for the paycheck that buys the groceries for the working families in this county. So I support what Dave's does, and I'd like Bob to see if there's a way that we can do something with the money out of it. The other thing I want to say is I'm pretty impressed with this budget, Bob, simply from the fact that with the spreadsheets that we got sometime way back show that we were going to be, that the fund balance could be as low as $7.5 million at the end of this year. The fund balance only went down about $600,000. We did a pretty good job last year. You only spent about $600,000 more than we took in. So our reserves still are $17 million. We're not destitute. It's a lot better than the $7.5 million reserve that we were looking at last year. Okay.
Joe, a snapshot of the previous year, you're correct. But I will point out again to you, like I did at the last meeting, and the fact is that we've had annual deficits in the last 3 out of 4 years. 2018 was somewhat of an anomaly in the trend, yes. But I'm projecting that we could have as much as a $2.4 million deficit this year in 2019. To say that you want to spend $845,000 out of this year's reserves, or out of our reserves to fund a pay raise, gets the pay raise accomplished. But then you are going to be appropriating another $845,000 next year, and the following year, and the following year. That goes on forever. So if you don't have the available resources, and I'll get to that in a minute with the family arena, if you don't have the funding in your budget to at least exceed your annual expenses, and you're continually dipping into your reserves to fund additional expenses, you're only compounding the problem. You're not fixing anything. And it's irresponsible, frankly, to embark on that kind of trend in the way that we accomplish budgets around here.
I was also told that none of the department directors or department heads were asked to cut their budgets this year. Okay, now whether that's true or not.
We did it for them.
Well, what I'm saying,
PD did their own.
what I'm saying is,
We asked them to
Yeah.
cut, and
Yeah.
as I pointed out before, the police department came in with $350,000 worth of cuts to the budget that they proposed,
a
yeah.
1% cut to those individual departments would pay for this increase for future years.
No, Joe,
Let me just-
I pointed that out at the last meeting.
Let me just finish, please, okay? So you pay for it this year with the police funds from the family arena, and then next year you just tell all department heads, if we want to sustain this increase, we're going to need to cut 1% from your budget. 1% on an $80 million budget is more than sufficient to do so.
Let me talk to the family arena.
Yeah.
The total available resources that you see there, it's not money that they have to spend.
Yeah, and going back to 2016, we had $19 million in ending fund balance. At the end of this current budget year, we got 17 million, so even though we did have deficit spending, the total ending fund balance went down 2 million, okay?
In the last, 4 years ago, we had a fund balance of 21 million,
2015,
Bob, when you
and
say,
now we have 17 million.
you say, let me talk to the family arena, what does that mean?
The family arena does not have any kind of available resources. The family arena has a cumulative deficit right now between $4 and $5 million. They're $4 to $5 million in the hole. And the reason why we stopped charging the family arena for the overtime was because that deficit that you see on the family arena financial statement at the end of the year, that deficit is charged against the general fund balance when our annual report is prepared, our annual audit report. So the $17 million that you see right now on your information that you're looking at, Joe, when our audit report comes out, our fund balance is actually $13 million. So we have to be very careful here.
in the budget 17.
I'm not talking about the budget. I'm talking about our audited financial statement that comes out at the end of the year when Showalter and Jabouri are finished up. Whatever the cumulative loss is in the family arena, historically and accumulated, which right now is between $4 and $5 million, that loss is offset against the general fund balance in our annual audit.
Okay, hang on, I have a question.
Yep.
Why do we have a $4 million loss on the family arena? And I ask that only because when I brought this up last week, you told me the family arena did not have a loss against the general fund.
Those are losses that were incurred from about 2005 forward, not just recently. In recent years, the losses have been much smaller than what they had been. But back in the day, and I mentioned this at the last budget work session, when the county sold the water plant, County Executive Ortworth at the time took part of those proceeds from the sale of the water plant and zeroed out the accumulated losses to that time. So from the time of that $1.5 million transfer to the family arena fund to eliminate its losses that had accumulated to that point, which were only a few years, because the family arena was taken over by the county after Fame defaulted in 2001 and 2, something
Right.
like that. So there had only been a couple of years worth of operating at that point to generate that $1.5 million. Since then, losses have continued to accumulate again, and that's why we're at $4.5 to $5 million now.
It's a
That
historic,
wasn't that $3 million from the water plant? You remember?
Yeah, I think it was around 2.8 or something like
Yeah,
that, that actually was the sale price.
But Bob,
We-
why are you leading us to believe it's a false sense of security? You think there's 17 million, but with Joe's question, we're actually.
Well, I'm getting to the point as to why the police overtime was not charged
well,
to the family
actually,
arena.
police overtime was stopped charged to the family arena primarily for this. Sheriff Neer came to me and said, we have a fundamental problem down there. When they are preparing for a show, they are including 2 officers. If the show is very big and very vibrant, we have a lot of traffic, we potentially have a crowd problem, I'm having to actually plan for 4, maybe 6 people down there. They can't afford that in those shows. There's a disconnect between what's worked for the family arena and what we as a law enforcement agency believe we need down there. And I told him at the time, you need to plan for what you as a law enforcement agency believe you need to do to protect the county asset, the public, everything down there. So for a long time, they did continue to charge 2 officers. I don't know when they stopped doing that, but you couldn't tell the police department they couldn't send extra resources if they needed them that night because of crowd size or the
I don't think anybody
ambulance of
has
the
a
crowd.
problem with the officers being there. The issue, I think, is how we're paying them and where the money's coming from. So it gets back to the fact, and we've talked about this now for at least a year, maybe more. If the family arena is under the Parks Department, you can use Parks funds to go pay those officers. So you could have 6 officers for the event if you need it, but it's not going to be a general revenue cost at that point. It's going to be a Parks Fund cost at that point. They have the funds to pay for the officers, so you don't have to worry about it. And the county executive said at least 4 years ago, we have to treat the family arena like we treat the parks because we don't ask our parks to make us money, but it brings a fundamental value to the community as a whole. And I think if you look at all of the high school graduations that we have, the Lindenwood graduations, and the other events that are there, I agree with him. I think the family arena serves a really good purpose for our community. But we have a dedicated revenue source for the family arena, or for the Parks Department. If we're going to treat the family arena like it's a park, then let's put it under the Parks Department that has the revenue. Let's make up for the loss of that revenue that's there. So if you need to pay those cops, pay those cops. I don't think anyone's trying to get our cops to be there and not be paid or...
No, I was just explaining to you historically, but it
I get
still is
that.
going to be a matter, and maybe we need to have John speak to that, because I know he did a plan with Councilman Klinghammer at the time. There's only still so much money coming in on parks as well, so it's a matter of what do you want to spend it on?
Well, the thing I'm confused, what, John?
John was going to.
Oh, Terry, or John, I'm sorry.
So I mean, the park budget is, in simple terms, it brings in, if you look, take the Amazon money out. You guys remember we've said funds coming through Amazon, we're treating that as one-time money so that we don't start funding park operations with those funds. And so what it brings in 2019, it looks like about 2020 will be about $12,850,000. That's use tax, the Metro Parks tax, interest revenue, and then their fees on rentals and events. So they bring about $12,850,000. If you look at what it takes to operate the park annually, right about $10 million. So if you throw in the bond payment for the family arena, which was mentioned by the council, that put us spending just that recurring costs of $12,500,000, $12,250,000. Basically, it'd be a break even with revenues. So if that's the direction the council wants to go, in order to pay the additional time for the sheriff's department, we're going to be spending in a deficit mode in the parks fund. Or we're going to be spending that Amazon money for personnel.
Well, my opinion is that the family arena's been a loser since day one, and we don't want to mix a loser with a winner because our parks department is a winner, and that's a bad business move to mix one bad business with a good business. So I would keep them separate and figure out what you need to do with the family arena and not contaminate the parks department. That's what we should do.
The problem is that the Parks has got a good revenue stream. I don't know why you're considering Amazon a one-year deal. That Amazon's use tax money's gonna be coming in for years and years to come.
We're not
okay?
sure how they're gonna treat in that sales in the long term. So when we spoke to the council in the past, that's the direction you guys have given us, is that we need to consider Amazon money as one time so that we spend that as a capital type items for replacement of equipment and development, but not to actually become reliant upon that should it disappear.
Councilman, the problem that we have is even though we've been up to talk to the State Department of Revenue, they don't quite know how this is gonna lay out, what'll be sales tax, what'll be use tax. And so if it starts switching out of being paid, if it's coming out of the St. Peter's Fulfillment Center or the Hazelwood Fulfillment Center, and it's coming in as sales tax, it'll start to show up on the sales tax side. We're just telling parks basically, don't rely on it, continue to treat it as though you only have whatever's coming in that year for that year. So spend it on capital, spend it on one-time things, because if it starts being reported as sales tax, it won't be in the parks tax program, it would be a benefit to the general fund.
And if we start using it to pay personnel and that fund dries up, we're laying off personnel.
What's the debt
That's
on
the,
the family?
like I said, we're at 12.8 million basically, and to operate annually, we're at right at that 10 million, 10.8. So if you throw the bond payment in there, we are essentially at a break even, and that means no additional
You've got a
development.
beginning fund balance also of 2019 estimate $18 million. So you got, I mean, I'm assuming the beginning fund balance means that you've got that money in that bank somewhere along the line. Okay?
there's
And I don't know what the definition of total available resources is, but to a business guy, total available resources, how much money you got access to? What's your availability? And it shows 27 million in total available resources for
If
parks.
we want to start spending down fund balance, or that's an option. The goal not only is not to spend more than what your revenues are coming in, unless we have a big project like Veterans Tribute Park. We obviously spent a lot of that fund balance down for that new development. So you're correct, there would be still some money in the bank.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but no matter what we're talking about right now, we're spending more than we're bringing in. So we're going to spend it from some source. Whether it's parks or whether it's general fund, we're going to spend more than we're planning on bringing in according to this budget, right?
Right. General fund, you're speaking of, right?
General fund.
Yes.
So if we need to offset that somewhere, I disagree with you. The Parks Department has a guaranteed revenue source that's coming in. If I can offset some general revenue expense to the Parks Department and even make the Parks Department a wash at a break-even point, I'm deficit spending over here right now. If I make that a wash over here, I make this a wash. So if I can offset the cost, because it sounds like I'm about $2 million off, if we went from 19 to 17 in year over year on our fund balance, and that's where we end up, I get a $2 million that I'm offsetting. He just said if we move that over, that $2 million now got set by parks. I'm now even. I didn't deficit spend anymore.
What 2 million are you talking about?
The $2 million that he just mentioned.
You're talking about the bond payments. The
But that doesn't come out of the general fund.
So this is why I'm confused. You told me that before, and he just put it in there. So tell me why I can't make that bond payment out of that parks fund again. He just
If you make
did,
the
based
park-
on what
if
he
you
just
make
told
the-
us.
If you make the bond payment for the family out of any other fund other than the capital projects fund, you're going to relieve the capital projects fund. You're not going to relieve the general fund.
So
Capital
why would
projects
you put
pays
that-
the bond payments.
Because Councilman Cronin talked about
It was his
if we
example.
freed up the 2.5 out of capital, that we could use that to make improvements at the jail. He was bonding that additional cap out of capital. And so I was building upon the information that he gave us, that if that's the direction you went, and we're gonna pay that bond payment out of parks, therefore shoring up capital, it's an ideal, but it would essentially keep the park fund equal, and then you have essentially no new development in parks.
Well, the operating costs for the parks are only, well, going back 17, they were 5.5 million. Now the actual personnel and operating costs are up somewhere to about $7 million. But you've got 14 million coming in, so you still got $7 million of surplus to use for capital. The family arena bond payment is how much?
2.8 million.
So you still have $4 million a year for capital improvements for parks.
That's not very much though, if you want to buy
You
something,
have
something
to-
comes up.
I think we're about bought out.
You also gotta look at, we
You
talked
still got $4
earlier about the
million a
interfund
year.
transfer, that's the cost allocation number that you can pick up. You pulled out the personnel and operating to get to those two numbers.
Yes.
You also gotta pick up the interfund transfer, which is the cost allocation the Parks Department, they're paying $885,000 to the General's Park Capital. And then there's also,
What's the 886 represent?
that's our cost allocation. Michelle McBride just talked about the cost allocation for her fund. That's how much Parks pays to the cost allocation.
See, you're doing a lot better than Parks is.
They're taking in 14 million.
Yeah.
They have 17 million in reserves.
So the other item that we need to have is that there's about a little over $1 million in annual spend in gas, electric, those type of capital and operating costs that are further down in the budget that you're not seeing right on that summary page. Equipment replacement, lawnmowers, all of those things that are just required to run all parks that we have on a day-to-day basis that they have to buy. So if they could run a park with just paying a guy and have no other equipment, yeah, that's reasonable. But there are annual reoccurring costs that they're not gonna get rid of.
We also, don't we, Jen, how many parks do we have undeveloped? Do you have money allocated for that?
We do currently, but if we were gonna move forward with moving it into the family arena, future development, add Spring Bend, New Melly, all of that would have to be put on hold.
That's what I'm saying, you start spending money like that, you're not gonna, our park department's been doing a great job, I don't think you wanna mess that up.
You still got $4 million a year.
$4 million a year, Joe, how much, how much is $1 million, $2 million a year? How much, them parks are more than $1 million to.
Veterans was 10 million, wasn't it?
Yeah, 10 million for veterans.
I think that, but we're here for the long term.
You just don't want to deplete the funds. The Parks Department is one of the successful things that is a shining star in the county. You don't want to mess that up. But my quick question, Bob, how much do we owe on the family arena?
About 12 million.
What's the appraised value of it? Do we know?
No, we haven't had it appraised. It's considerably more than that.
It's more than that, the appraised value? How come we don't sell that thing? What the
Should be paid off.
We've tried.
Bond payment's done 5 or 6 years ago.
2024 is the last full payment. There's a $300,000 payment in
So we
2025.
ding parks, if we buy family arena, we ding parks for till 2024 till the family arena's paid off. And then you don't have that payment anymore. Then you got the full amount for parks again. You're only talking about 3 years. Okay, 4 years.
I don't know, there's stuff that the parks just seems to be on track, and the county voters voted. You had 2 votes. You voted for the family arena, went to a vote, right, Steve?
No.
No,
It did not?
the council did that over the county
I wasn't
executive's
on
veto.
there.
Right.
I wasn't on there. That was, no, it wasn't, that was before my time. That was like
Haven't you
90.
been here since we
I'm
started?
just going to qualify that.
You were on the council. You, sir, was on the council. I was not.
Veto was not over purchasing the family arena. The veto was over contract language.
Oh, it was?
Yeah.
Hey, Joe, I
Boss.
wasn't here for that,
I know you weren't.
but I was here for about 18 months, and we had people showing up at every meeting that cared about open space and parks.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's my point.
Figure that into your calculation.
Well, that's what I'm trying to say. We voted on the Proposition Y for parks tax, and that's what it was for parks. And because we did not have a parks department, the parks department started in 2000, right? And so that's a little deceptive if we're switching, the people voted to have parks, open spaces. We have open space parks, large acreage.
Time out. You've got historic homes that have got done. You've got a youth activity park that's not really a park, it's an amusement park, okay? You got all kinds of stuff paid for through the years of that parks fund, including the doors of this courthouse, okay? So I mean, just saying it's just for green spaces, open spaces, it's never been that way. It's always been historic buildings, other youth activity parks are more like a skateboard. amusement
On the
park.
historic buildings, though, Joe, in a lot of those cases, the ground, wasn't it partially donated or donated to us and returned? So, I mean, there's negotiation, give and take, but buying some dinosaur of a building with the Parks Fund is not the intention of that tax. That's just my belief. But, you know.
Okay, so at the end of the day, I understand what you're saying, but we're still deficit spending. So the point of all this discussion, as lovely as parks are, and there's a really nice one in District 3 that I'm really proud of, but we're deficit spending. So as nice as parks are, we gotta figure out somewhere
But then you
to
guys
move money
you
somewhat.
just said you can't do that, right?
None of what you're talking about with the Parks Department assimilating the family arena has anything to do with the general fund.
pays those cops.
You could get a one-time payment out of it. They're not paying $1 million a year to cops down there. I
Well, it
mean,
was since 2000.
you could go back and pull a one-time payment out, but, I mean, it's still a one-time payment.
It
And if you're-
doesn't fix the problem.
Yeah.
So I don't think we have any one thing short of just going through and whacking people, right? Because that's our biggest expense is
That's the
personnel.
next step.
So, what's that?
That could be the next step.
So what I'm saying is, I don't want to have to sacrifice our people to get to a number. I'm trying to find the most creative way to get there. Because I don't think there's any one thing you can do, I think we're gonna have to piecemeal this thing together, 100 grand here, 50 grand there, 200 grand there, to get to the number of where we're not deficit spending anymore. Maybe Parks isn't gonna give us all the money, but it could give some. You just said, we may need 6 cops there, 7 cops there, instead of 2 cops there. Well, rather than pay that out of the general revenue fund, I'm paying for them out of Parks. What's it save? I don't know, but it saves something. And maybe that saves 2 or 3 people's jobs, if I can do that. Then that's a win in my mind. Maybe I'm not paying a bond payment because it comes out of a different fund that obviously has a different revenue stream. Fine. I'm just trying to figure out a way to where if we can piecemeal this thing together, and quite frankly, Jennifer and I had this discussion the other day. I'm kind of frustrated about the fact of anytime somebody from the council keeps bringing up an idea that says, well, what if we do this, this, or this? All we're told is, well, that doesn't fix the problem. Okay, but we're trying to work an idea to get there. So we can't go get a tax increase from the voters today. So what can we do today to try and get to where we need to be? I don't think we're going to be able to get the employees a raise this year based on all this unless we went to deficit spend anymore. Sorry, Terry.
Well, no, it's obvious that we're going to deficit spend because that's, if we followed exactly what you laid out, we deficit spend for next year, correct? Okay, so that's going to happen. However we pull it from wherever we pull it, okay, it's just a matter of, without a dedicated new source of income or a higher source of income,
Right.
we are, to repeat what he's been saying, we are on the same course
To run out
for
of money.
next year and the year after and the year after that, which means, a lot of very, very bad things for the county, all right? So, I think the question is, and again, this is a hard question for all of us, do we deficit spend a little bit more this year with the hope that it will be corrected next year or the year after with new sources of income, or not?
I think he's dead on doing incremental change, okay? A little bit here, a little bit there. We can get $1 million is still a pretty good chunk of money. That's twice what we could get from repaying the family repaying for the police is twice what the deficit was this year. It'd be $1 million, $1.2 million, something like that, or 600 grand. So I mean that would be one thing. And the other thing is, we talk about the bond payments. The bond payments for family are done in 4 years. That frees up some money that we can use elsewhere in park development. Okay, Chuck Gross thought that was a pretty good idea about that family arena years ago. I talked to him first month I was in council about that. Okay, because realistically, it's no different. The other thing is, might be some savings involved. I don't think a parks ranger costs as much as a police officer, and I don't know why a parks ranger couldn't patrol the family arena just as well as a police officer in most instances.
There are no park rangers anymore. We eliminated them last year.
Oh, you put them on the police department. That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, everybody talks like we're broke, but we got a 3% emergency reserve, and then we got 10%, 13% of money that's sitting there. And I don't know, maybe if we deficit spend enough, the taxpayers will realize once we're in the red, they're going to have to do a tax increase. So I don't know.
I don't think it'll happen that way. As long as you act like nothing's wrong and we can continue to kick the can down the road, the public's not going to care one iota. What will resonate with the taxpayers of this county is because if we have a legitimate need, that our revenues are not keeping up with our expenses, and we have to start sacrificing essential services that are being dedicated to the public out there, and they realize that services have to be cut, then that might resonate. But you don't want to go there. And kicking the can down the road and saying, well, it's only $845,000, so let's just go ahead and do that. And hopefully down the road, somebody will realize we're having an issue and we're not going to be able to continue this very long. So yeah, the public will endorse some sort of tax proposal. That's wishful thinking. It's not going to happen that way. The public's perception is its reality, and as long as what they get out of county government is there, they're not going to perceive the need for any kind of new revenue stream.
Mr. Elman?
Mr. Chairman, these people spend a whole lot of time studying this. And we go through the same process. They go the same process with me that they're going through now with you. And believe it or not, I ask a lot of the same questions, okay? And one of the questions they asked me early on is, you can't do everything. What would you rather do? No raise or layoffs? Or cut services? And at that point, my response was, well, I guess I'd rather do no raise, because as we get into the year, if we get additional money or things get better or new revenue comes in, we can always do a raise later. Once you lay somebody off and destroy their livelihood, it's a little bit tougher to hope that 6 months later maybe we can get them back. And once you cut the services, then, well, same situation. So given the hard choices that I had to make and now you all have to make, I would just suggest that the raise situation is the one most easily rectified should we get an infusion of cash, or should the, Black Friday was very successful, all right? 20% higher than last year, all right? Of course, the bad news is today we had Cyber Monday, which means, more and more people are shopping online. So when you're so reliant on the sales tax, you just have to wait and see what happens. But anyway, that's why I made the decision I made to come to you with a budget that had no raise. It wasn't because I wanted to. It was because I felt the alternatives were just worse than what we actually did.
And we have done that in the past. I mean, there's been at least once, possibly twice, since I've been on the council, that we did find additional funding came in, and we, in July or something, correct me if I'm wrong, we gave a tax, or a pay increase.
Our sales tax figures are better than we thought they were going to be.
Yes. I mean, that's really very wishful thinking now, I understand that, but I mean, it has been done in the past.
We're going to have to cut the work session short because of problems with our computer, so we're going to go for another about 4 minutes, quarter till we're going to have to close, so.
Council Chair, I just checked, and she is connected to the internet now, so
Okay.
if you do have some more discussion.
All right, we'll
she
go
said
on,
that she
we'll
doesn't
go on
have that
until
issue.
about 10 till if anybody has anything else. Is there anything else you wanted to
I
add?
just have, before we get off of this.
Sure.
Since 2017 to 2019, the deficit spending it's only gone down from almost 19 million to a little over 17 million. It's only gone down $1,468,000. So I think we're being super conservative when we're talking about, we're going to go into severe deficit spending if we give the employees a small raise, and I just don't see it. it may go down a little bit more, but we're talking
8%
8%
over 3 years.
over 3 years. So I still think we can do it, and I think we ought to, and I'm going to make that motion when this comes to before the county council.
Do you have?
We could still cut some on the operating budget. I don't know why. That happened to me when I was department head here. When they needed money, they cut our.
So Dave, on
They
your
said,
motion,
cut your operating expenses by 10%.
on your motion, it'll be people who make salary of
8,000 or
a
less.
salary, not an overtime, salary of
Yeah.
80,000 or
Base
less.
pay.
Council members, I think it would be prudent at this time to have Sam kind of give you an overview. We've been using some terms related to raises that mean some very specific things. And also, as we talk about salary or raises that would be tied to a specific dollar amount, that has some very serious complications and issues that I think we need to be aware of. So if Sam could kind of address some of those, and then whatever decisions you may make. But I think we need to make sure we're all on the same page as it relates to terminology.
Okay. I just kind of want to start with a brief overview of what we discussed back in June of how we're coming up with our compensation analysis and give you an update of where we are now as it pertains to these increases that we're discussing. So as you remembered, we used to have a step process, and we changed that step process and we created pay ranges. We kind of talked about that a little bit, and you're familiar with that. And this helped fix the compression issue. And a lot of what we're talking about right now could result in a compression issue again. And the compression issue was that we had long-term employees that were getting paid the same as employees that were coming in, those new employees. And so it caused like a bottleneck effect. And when we changed to our pay ranges, we were able to stop that. To go along with that and to keep that from happening again, we obviously started using COLA, those cost of living adjustments, market adjustments. And what those were, obviously, is that the pay ranges as a whole changes. So your start, your middle, your maximum pay actually goes up. So the whole pay range changes. And then we also used merit increases. So our employees who scored 3 or higher on their evaluations were getting those increases, whatever we decided that merit increase was. But that wasn't enough to ensure that this doesn't happen again. So then we did our classification plan. So if you remember, Evergreen, I believe it was, had come in before and they analyzed our positions and they kind of helped with where we want to go from here. And one thing that you all stressed is that you wanted to be at market value. You don't want to be above market, you don't want to be below market, you want to ensure that we're at market. So when we did our job classification plan changes, we went from using outside sources to pay factors. And if you guys, do you all remember the pay factors analysis we did for you? Okay, so we started using pay factors to ensure that we stayed at that market value. So we took all of our pay, all of our positions, and we separated them to that 3-year classification plan. Right now we have 392 titles, but of those titles we have 550 positions or job descriptions. So you may see something like a government service rep. While that is a title, a government service rep can be in many different departments, and so they do different things. So that means that we have that position to analyze too. So that's where we come up with that about 550 job descriptions to analyze. So we took those and we separated that 3-year classification plan. So this year, with the changes that we did, we just moved into our year 1 classification. So every position that's in each year gets analyzed. And before, remember I told you we just did those benchmarks, we just selected a couple and we analyzed those and determined if there need to be changes. Well, this year we did all of them. We analyzed all 225. So when we finished that process, we realized that of those 225, actually only 5 positions were outside of where they should be. They weren't properly assigned, which is pretty amazing when you consider where we are in those positions we analyzed. So then, once we were finished with that, then we came up with the idea that we needed to really look at our evaluation system. And it's really important to have an appropriate evaluation system when you want to ensure that you're compensating your employees appropriately. You need to make sure that they're performing and that you're paying them accordingly. And so we looked at implementing a performance management plan. So really analyzing our evaluations, what we had before. I'm sure you've all have taken a look at our evaluations and how they were. We had those 17 competencies, and we've moved that to 7 or 8 competencies to really be able to adequately analyze our employees. And then we put that in the new Munis system so that they can be stored there. Supervisors would evaluate their employees through the system, Employees could acknowledge it through the system. We could have provers through the system, and then they'd be stored in the system. So we had it all in one place. And that's just the next step of where we are in trying to really properly analyze our performance management within the county. And the reason this is all important is because it is tied to pay and how we're paying our employees. So right now, one of the biggest problems we're facing is that there's not enough funding to provide raises based on compensation plan. And instead, we're only providing raises based on extremely limited funds, as you know, as we were just discussing. Which means we're not utilizing that COLA and merit as we intended to, because we don't necessarily have the funds to do things that way. And the other thing, let me show you this too, just so you guys can get a picture of this. When we're talking about those COLA increases, this is what it was looking like.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but COLA this year is 1.8, I think last year was 2.8.
It's 1.6 this year, and last year I believe it was 2.8.
Okay, well, I guess the number I just got was updated as 1.8, but they got no merit increase last year, right? There's no merit this year. Was there a merit
They
increase
got a
last year?
2% merit last year and a 1% COLA.
No,
So there was
last year.
3% last year.
And this year, just nothing proposed merit or COLA, right?
Zero. Correct.
Yeah, okay.
And so whenever employees are coming to me discussing what their big issues are, what they're really stressing to me is that they are just unsure, when you look at those pay ranges, how they're moving within the pay ranges. And that's because they're not really moving with those pay ranges. And once again, what we're looking at facing is a compression issue. They're not moving. If we just look at just doing COLA, what's going to happen when we do just COLA is that you're going to get into another compression issue.
And I want to pause, Sam, because she says things quick. We know on a regular basis, we hear from employees who say they're concerned about their compensation. And one of the things I know that you all are focused on is maintaining good morale for employees. Their morale right now, and we hear it every day, is not tied to the salary range or the market range of my job is not appropriate in the marketplace. They're saying to us, I never know when I'm going to get to midpoint. I could be here for 30 years, and I never know if I'm going to get to the midpoint of the range or the top of the range. And that's because we have no policy in place for how you move through that. So what Sam's handing out in this second handout is showing you a hypothetical. What if we only did merit rate, or which one? Market adjustments, Sam?
Yes, merit.
Merit raises of 2% every single year. And we never moved the pay grid, which is not something that we would ever do because then those ranges are always going to fall behind. But even if we hypothetically did that, you can see how long it takes for somebody in pay band A, a custodian, or a building inspector in pay band B, or a lieutenant in pay band C, how long it takes to get to midpoint. And that midpoint should be the level to which you are proficient in the job.
Right.
So if we have a custodian who's going to take, I think it's 9 years to become proficient in the job as custodian, they're probably not working for us as a custodian. Same for a lieutenant. If it takes you 13 years to get to market, to be proficient in your job, you're probably not working for us anymore because it takes you much less time to be able to figure out how to do those jobs. We need to be able to start moving and compensating with merit raises that are moving you through that range in a more advanced period of time. And as we're talking about just doing another 1% market increase, which is what the terms you all have been discussing over the last couple of weeks, we're just moving that grid. And so all we're doing is bringing in those new people for first year on the job who are going to continually just backing up closer and closer to those who've been on the job for 3 to 5 years. And that's recreating the compression problem that cost us a significant chunk of money in 2 years to fix. And what we want to make sure we are doing is avoiding that problem as much as possible again in the future.
But if you apply the 2% uniformly, not only is your starting point, but your midpoint and your high point all move accordingly. So
That's
proportionally, they're all the same.
What this is showing you is a merit increase only. So if all I did was move you through the range 2% every year, that's how long it takes you to get there. We know we would never do that because that means that the starting point of the range for that employee is going to fall behind market and midpoint is going to fall behind market at some point. So what we're really doing is we're moving the grid and we're moving you a little bit in there. We're moving the grid and we're moving you a little bit further along that range. That merit raise needs to be significantly larger in proportion to that market increase on a regular basis so that those employees are achieving midpoint earlier. And so I use the hypothetical, or it's not hypothetical, I use the example of City of St. Peters. City of St. Peters has some very detailed policy and building inspectors are on there as the example. Building inspectors in the city of St. Peters have 3 or 4 different levels of inspectors, and you achieve those and you move into those positions based on years of service and your achievement of certifications appropriate to that job. You will be at midpoint in one of those particular jobs in 4 years maximum. You know you're going to get to that midpoint. Right now, our employees never know when they're going to get to midpoint, and that is extremely frustrating for them.
And how do you fix that?
In the long term, how we fix that is the course that we're on right now, which is having implemented an appropriate evaluation system. I spoke with Councilman Elam the other day that our next big step needs to be an investment in training of managers on how to appropriately evaluate employees. We've had some departments and some mid-level managers who've really stepped it up this year and did a great job of evaluating employees. But if you don't have a good evaluation tool and you're going to start awarding raises based on performance, and you have somebody who's evaluating you poorly, that's not going to be a good tool for how do you award those raises. So we need a combination of things, and Sam's going to highlight quickly a few of the options that we might look at as to how do we move forward with that next step of performance evaluation and pay for performance. But right now, just simply talking about moving the grid another percentage for only a certain group of employees is going to exacerbate the compression problem we're already in.
And it's going to develop, complacency because you have these employees who are just going to get raises and they don't have to do anything for them. The goal is to do those performance improvement plans, to do that performance management, to get our employees where they need to be so we have those performers who are high performing moving through the grid, and not just everybody moving through the grid regardless of how they're performing. So one of the things we wanted to look at is really focusing on our high performers and rewarding them, which when you do that, it is more cost effective for the county because you're not just uniformly giving everybody an increase. You're really looking at those employees who are performing. So a couple things you could do, and these are just ideas that, we haven't really done a lot of research on it, but, there's the performance budget per department. So depending on the size and the amount of employees, you would assign a budget and say, here's your budget, evaluate your employees, and then, assign them raises accordingly. It's not just everyone gets a 3% sort of thing. You could also do that but you could look at it more like, okay, we have an increase based on performance, but also your location in your pay grade. If you have someone who's really far behind the midpoint and they should be up there, then maybe you're going to give them a higher increase for their performance to get them to where they need to be. And then there's other things people utilize. I'm sure you've heard of like 9-square rating, where you take your employees and you rate them in the square. You have your highest rated employee, highest performing employee, your lowest performing employee, and then you assign an increase based off of where they fit within that 9-square. And then, you could always look at things like for a series, going back to series for those frontline employees. Maybe they need to move up based off of what they're able to achieve, their education, their skill level. If they're going to school because they're a carpenter, maybe they need to get more skills in that set. And if they get where they need to be, then they would get that increase. So there's a lot of things that we can look at as far as how to reward our employees versus just uniformly giving them that increase.
One final thing I want to highlight as it relates to any conversation you all plan to have about next steps as it relates to raises is that you would be much better served having that conversation around providing that raise to employees within certain pay grades. We have 5 pay ranges that straddle $80,000 a year. So you're going to have employees making $79,500 who will get a 2% raise and potentially either align with the employee at 80 and some change who won't be getting that raise and will be then at the same pay rate, and that's going to cause a lot of consternation amongst employees who aren't getting that raise. Also have the possibility of police sergeants who start to back up significantly amongst police lieutenants. I can tell you that it will indeed be a problem when you talk about this particular salary number. So I think if there's going to be some conversation about it, it needs to be talking about the range so that you don't have employees doing the exact same work who are getting a raise and some not, and so that we aren't further exacerbating compression problems amongst employees doing the same job. So I think a shift to talking about we want it to be for employees who make under pay grade 210 or below, whatever the appropriate grade is you want to discuss, but that is a much more appropriate path than talking about a dollar.
It does the same thing.
Yes, it
Okay,
does,
in the
but,
same way your illustration here is, it's like you read our minds, it was 2%. whether you call them merit or a COLA, the numbers are the same, okay? So,
The
but
numbers are the same, but if you
Yeah.
make an amendment to say that you're gonna give a market or a COLA adjustment, that means removing a grid.
The grid
That does not mean.
starting
removing-
salary and top
Which
salary
would affect
mix.
everyone in that
I
group.
don't see any issue with doing it by pay grade at all. I mean, it's the same, you're doing the same thing. You're just gonna have to figure out which pay grades are close to a tenth that Dave's got of 80 grand or less.
Well, up to pay grade 210 gives you the A and B bands, whereas band C is the higher level management employees for the most part.
All right, we have 4 minutes till our council meeting, so let's bring this to a close. And I guess you want to have another work session before the next council meeting? All right, so we'll do that.
We're going to have another joint work session on December 16th
Yes.
at 5:30.
5:30?
All right, let's,
You'll be running. Okay. This work session is adjourned.
You can bring whatever leftovers that you have.